Oh, hey. So, this is after playing with the Macher. I have to say, it was not everything I hoped it would be. Not at all. It's not my kind of game, but I can see why people like it. Let's look at, first of all, what you get. And I'm sure the newer copies aren't as heavy on the cardboard. This was printed back in '86. Printing paper was a lot cheaper then. And I know that games have, well, they've come up with different solutions, right? You'll still get maybe hard boards, but they're lighter. These feel hefty. They don't feel like they're of this age and era. Anyway, who knows? I mean, it's possible to make a dense cardboard still, I guess, and maybe worth it for some of them. But this definitely, you know, the components are a good solid piece in this, and any game that comes out of this, you know, of this style on something so with such a name should probably have at least as good a components. I don't know how good the Valley Games edition came out, but you kind of hope that it's putting out the nice quality components. They're very I'm not going to quite say elegant, but there's a minimalism to them that's very appealing, you know, with these cards with just a sketch on them. Apparently, from what I've been told, of real political figures. That sounds kind of, I don't know, dangerous from a legal perspective. In particular, though, you get a board for Bonn itself, not Berlin. It's not that important in terms of what that Germany, that this game was designed for its politics. And then these cards to handle the political campaigns in the provincial elections. And then you have a bunch of provincial cards, which creates some of the randomness of the game, where these are really not aligned with any particular ideologies or anything, unlike some of the US election games where certain states clearly are aligned with certain concepts and ideas or with parties. Here, the only real effect that's directly linked to the game is the size of the population. And that's going to be handled here by the size of the mandate, which is the election multiplier that's brought into an election. And the larger that number, something like this, with its huge numbers, gives you a big multiplier and produces a lot more votes going into Bonn. It can also produce more cash for you. You get your play money, which is okay. There's nothing special about it. Lots and lots of nice, you know, wooden pieces. For me, for this era, this would have been kind of a wonder to find games with this kind of wooden pieces. Now they look, well, they look kind of cheesy with those thumbs and everything, but and they feel a little lighter actually than the wooden pieces of today, strangely enough. But still, you know, it's an interesting experience to look at something of this age. You get some nice player aids. Unfortunately for me, they're in German, along with the rules and everything else in the game. I have a printout of the English rules, which seem to be quite sufficient. The only thing that I would do to change that is I would certainly draw up a quick sequence of play. Again and again, I felt like that's the one thing that I was lacking, to get a real grasp on where I was going in the turn. But even within that, even if I know where I am in the game turn, as it were, this game is still going to be a problem for me. And there's one really simple reason for that. It's more in terms of enjoyment, in terms of being able to grasp it, in terms of everything. It's more about, I'm not going to say simple, but more complicated arithmetic calculations. It's not a math game in the sense of, you're not doing anything that's kind of interesting math, to me at least. And I'm not sure there are many such games where you're doing something particularly interesting in math. I mean, poker, you're doing probability. Probability is kind of interesting, right? It's a little bit more intriguing than this, although you could break probabilities down to simple calculations as well, right? So, and I'd be interested if anybody has a real math game in terms of where it's not just arithmetical calculations or things that are easily based on it, like probabilities that you know. Something where you maybe, I don't know, playing with abstract algebra. That would be kind of a neat idea. I'm not sure I would like it, but it would intrigue me to give something like that a look. But this is one of many Euro-type games where really, and I brought this up, you feel like you could calculate the whole thing. You still have to interact with other players, you have to figure out what they're going to do, etc. But it's just a somewhat more painful calculation than maybe I'd see in, I don't know, an 18xx game like I brought up before. Or maybe one of the Winsome games that I feel like, okay, maybe I didn't quite get it on the first play, but I can understand where the calculations are. They're very simple. They're not, they're not something that I'm going to be left with at the end of the game looking and saying, I've got to multiply and add and all of this to see who won. It's not even obvious to me, and I guess you could say the same about, well, we got to count the money and see who won in an XX game, because it may not be obvious who won. And that's fair enough. Except that I feel like I just didn't have the kind of information flow to tell who's winning at any given time. Basically, the problem here is that you're manipulating, both in the basic elections and in the later ones, a situation where you're working on a sum of certain factors you're trying to gather multiplied by some other factor you're trying to gather. Clearly you want the most of all of them, but it's not always obvious which one you want to aim for most, and it doesn't feel like it's worth figuring out to me. It bothers me because it does seem like it's a fairly simple calculation. One that if one spent 5 minutes on their turn with a calculator or a piece of paper and pencil, they could figure out what their best move is. But I don't want to spend that 5 minutes. It's not an interesting calculation, right? Now, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to be able to win the game if you can make those calculations right. Other people can still affect you. They can still stop you. Which in a way is all the more reason why those calculations just aren't worth being made. You want to make the right moves in general. You don't want to get screwed. But it's more about... it's not a guarantee that if you can make those calculations that you're going to be able to dominate the game completely. In fact, what we saw was a situation where the green player in the game that I was playing got to enough of a lead that everybody kind of worked against them a little bit, and then black was able to get a certain advantage over green because of that. Even in the last turn, there was a little ill will towards green because they had been in the lead for so long. I've seen that'll happen a lot in opposed games. But the particular way in which the scores are calculated doesn't really feel to me, I'm not going to say it's unrealistic, but it doesn't really feel like campaign strategy. It doesn't feel like you're looking for multipliers. And you could make the same argument about, certain military games, certain war games. Hey, artillery isn't really it doesn't multiply the value of the force, or terrain doesn't really make 2 to 1 more like 1 to 1. Yeah, I know. and there's an abstraction in both cases. This one's just harder for me to swallow. Now, I don't really know German politics very well at all. So I bring to it my understanding of American politics, which very easily does not work this way, okay? There might be... I like how Road to the White House handles this, by the way, where you put advertising in play, that's going to get you perhaps some votes, but it really... it's the organization that's your multiplier, and it does make sense that way because you're channeling points directly through. Well, in this, it kind of makes sense, too, that you have certain, certain beliefs, etc. The more you go out, the more little cubes you put out there, the more likable you are, the more your opinions mesh, etc. Those all make sense as a multiplier for the total number of votes you get. I like that part of it. I like collecting these S's. They make sense to me. But then when I go back and I have to see how many media cubes I have, I feel like they could have been a multiplier right at the time. It would almost make sense. You're convincing people, and as you bring the word to them, you're getting your media exposure. Why does it matter only at the end who has the media? Does it really? I don't know if that argument makes sense. But again, then, does it only matter how the opinion's been formed at the end? Maybe a little more there. And it's kind of this interesting interaction that I think, maybe if I think about it more, I'll like it more. Right now it feels like I'm just doing math, okay? That's what it feels like. But in a sense, it kind of makes some sense. I'm channeling the points through the current popular opinion with my organizational ability, with those cubes that I'm putting out, and then when the voters actually go back, sit back, and say, yeah, who am I going to vote for? Then they cast their votes based on not just how they were swayed originally, but then also by how they look back at it on reflection. Great. That's the provincial. Now I'm in the federal election. Now, maybe I don't know how German politics works. I always assumed it's pure parliamentary, which means you're putting legislators into Bonn who are going to vote based largely on the constituency. Well, they got their seat due to their constituency's views, but they actually are more or less committed to a certain party. You might have a few swinging back and forth, but in the end, I had the feeling that there's a prime minister who is elected and put into position. Now, I could be absolutely wrong on that. What if I am? What does that mean of that final election? And that's what I'm trying to capture. I don't get German politics enough to be able to say, okay, I know this is, right or wrong. So it doesn't feel like the parliamentary scenario that I put forward, okay? I'm not electing people in regional elections that eventually, first of all, they're trickling in one at a time. There's no general election going on here. And I'm not sure which way that is. And then, when they get there, they're not sort of committed, more or less, to one party or another. There seems to be a general vote there. Okay, so, what's this general vote? Well, it's counted up by the votes that I had that put my people into office. I mean, if it is a general election, you're not carrying those over. They might have swayed things somewhat, but you're not carrying those over. And you're also, it would make sense, let's see, the media power at that time that you've gathered, yeah, that makes sense as a multiplier. What about the agreement between the different platforms? Well, Yeah, that would make sense that that changes over the course of elections, etc. So I don't mind that that focuses and becomes one thing at the end, although it does make that final regional election very, very powerful to determine the entire nation's belief system. I don't think that is very likely. I really don't think that mechanism is in play. It seems, again, if I understood German politics, I could discuss this in a more reasonable way. What about the party base? Well, those strike me as the people that you've collected throughout the country, throughout the different regions that you've campaigned in, who are pretty much going to vote for you no matter what, and who are going to go out and do some work for you. How big a multiplier are they? Well, they're much, much less than the agreement on the issues or than the media. They're very powerful all the same as a multiplier. But okay, I can actually buy this kind of addition. What's hard for me to accept is the amount of time between these regional elections and the effect they have on the general, and the fact that there's 3 regions that don't get to vote. I mean, they get to vote in the general, I guess, somehow. It bothers me, the ordering and the feeling of it. It does not strike me as likely to be real. But I don't know enough to really tell you, yes it is, no it's not. It's just my gut tells me it's wrong, and that immediately makes me see this more and more as just a pure math game. Because I can't imagine the electoral process that this is trying to represent very well at all. The games that I have for U.S. electoral politics, I can see the connection. I have strong disagreements about how they actually manage it usually. But usually they make some sense to me, knowing kind of how the split up is. This one, is this like the primary system here? And are people really committed by who they vote for in the primaries, or will they be likely to change their mind between, say, the people that they put forward in their regional elections and when they face a national? Or is there no national? Is this just a purely parliamentary position, in which case, damn it, the people that I returned, yeah, maybe some of them will sway, but most of them are going to stick with their party, I would assume. Then there's another factor. National election. There's no coalition in the national election. That's the one where I'm used to there being strong coalitions, no? I don't know. Again, I don't know enough about German politics to be able to really say whether or not this covers it or not. As a game, though, if you judge a game inside of just its own little world, well, this is a math game, okay? But a game is of no interest to me in its own little world. It's only of interest in the simulation value it provides, unless it is a pure abstract. And if I was playing a pure abstract, I wouldn't play one where the goal is to be able to assemble the proper numerical multipliers and get a high total by adding. That's just not my kind of game, right? You know, if I'm playing an abstract, I'll play Go. You could say Go's a math game because it's economic and you're trading pieces, you're trading territory, and everything's got an opportunity cost. Well, yeah, okay, but it's not this kind of math game. It's not trying to do sums and multiplication. And for a game to be able to deal with this, it would have to be convincing to me that it's succeeding in portraying its political system well. And I'm hoping somebody comes back to me and says, yes, this is, and here's why. Because I'm just too damn lazy to look up the German political system and start reading about it. But when I look, well, obviously they're not running under the Weimar Republic anymore. The Weimar Republic certainly did not operate in this fashion. Whether or not modern Germany has, I don't know. It's quite possible that there is some sort... this one just does not convince me that it's real. Anyway, I've rated it about a 6 because of that. And the type of abstract game that it is one that I don't like. But I really do want to like this one. I really do. I want a game on politics that's not just U.S. politics, that's a good, solid game. I have a couple that aren't terribly good. Things like Der Führer. This has not convinced me that it's in the same realm as the American politics games that I think are all pretty much lacking. Although I did do a couple of reviews on Mr. President and 1960, both of which I think are kind of at the top of their class as representations of the American political system, as opposed to the ones that try to go into more detail, like Road to the White House, which I think actually fail utterly, even when you take them to the maximal details that they have. They're just not able to go deep enough to actually represent what they're trying to do. All right, up this goes.